Saturday, July 2nd, 1785. Why did Socrates offer a rooster to Aesculapius before his death? Professor Ofterdinger posed this question in our weekly colloquium. According to various interpretations, he believed that Socrates was already unconscious due to the effects of the poison. I, however, believe that Socrates, knowing the customary practice, did not want to offend the masses by neglecting this small offering. In ancient Greek practice, dedicating a rooster to Aesculapius, god of healing, was a customary act of gratitude upon recovery. Plato's Pedo, 118e to 119a, records that Socrates, as he prepared to drink the hemlock, instructed Crito to offer this cock in thanksgiving to Aesculapius, implying that death itself was a release, a form of healing from bodily troubles. Professor Ofterdinger, Hegel's classics instructor, raised this question to illustrate how ritual gestures could carry layered meanings. While some argue Socrates was already insensible to his surroundings, Hegel contends that Socrates observed the right to avoid offending public piety and to honor tradition. Sunday, July 3rd, 1785. On the way back from a walk, we, especially I, for vanity must always be involved, proposed this maxim: every good has its bad side, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on the good. We applied this saying at every step. R, who had taken a different path, was approaching. As we waited for him, one of us questioned what possible good could come from standing in the way. We answered, had we run off, someone might have tripped, or had an unkind thought. Very stoic indeed. The maxim, every good has its bad side, reflects a Stoic-influenced ethical perspective, reminiscent of Seneca's and Epictetus's emphasis on evaluating actions by their potential consequences. The reference to standing in the way illustrates a dialectical exercise common in Hegel's circle, where a seemingly negligible act, waiting, is analyzed for both positive intentions, courtesy, and possible negative outcomes, causing someone to stumble or harbor ill will. Monday, July 4th, 1785. During a walk, Professor Kless questioned me on various topics, especially on the Earth's tilt, which causes the seasons. I asked why it is often hotter in July and August than in June, when the sun is closest to us. It is known that heat arises from the sun's rays reflecting in our atmosphere. Professor Kless offered the following explanation. In June, the sun's direct contact excites the fiery particles near the Earth's surface. These then ignite neighboring particles in a chain reaction that reaches deep into the Earth. By July and August, most of these are activated, and thus the greatest heat is released back into the atmosphere. That is why it is hottest then. Professor Kless was Hegel's instructor in natural philosophy at the Stuttgart Gymnasium, where late 18th century science still invoked fiery particles, a remnant of phlogiston or caloric theories, to explain heat. The Earth's axial tilt, approximately 23.5 degrees, not its distance from the sun, which actually reaches perihelion in early January, governs the seasons. The notion that June's solar ignition of subsurface particles leads to a delayed release of maximum heat in July and August anticipates what we now term the seasonal lag. Land and atmosphere absorb solar energy over time before warming peaks weeks after the summer solstice. This exchange reflects Hegel's early engagement with contemporary explanations of thermodynamics and celestial mechanics. Tuesday, July 5th, 1785. I purchased the following books from the library of the late preceptor Loeffler, my most esteemed teacher and guide. Greek: Aristotle, Demorus; Demosthenes, Oration on the Crown; Isocrates, Speeches, 21, and Letters, Complete Works; Latin prose, Cicero, Philosophical Works; Aulus Gellius, Attic Nights; Valerius Paterculus, Diodorus Siculus; Latin poetry, Plautus, Catullus, Tibellus, Propertius, Gallus, Claudian, and Ausonius; Hieronymus Vita, Christian Virgil, Sannazaro. Preceptor Loeffler, as Hegel's former tutor at the Stuttgart Gymnasium had assembled the classical library that reflected the era's humanist curriculum. By acquiring these volumes, Hegel ensured access to foundational texts in philosophy, rhetoric, history and poetry, Aristotle, De Moris, a treatise on ethics. The Nicomachean Ethics was often transmitted under the title De Moris, exploring the nature of virtue, the good life, and moral character formation. Demosthenes' Oration on the Crown. Demosthenes' most celebrated speech, delivered in 330 BCE, defending his record as logographer and condemning his rival Aeschines, a model of Attic oratory, rhetorical skill, and political argument. Isocrates' Speeches 21 and Letters, Complete Works, a selection of Isocrates' 21 orations covering panegyric, hortatory, and political themes, accompanied by his epistolary corpus, illustrates the sophistication of 4th century BCE Greek rhetorical and ethical instruction. Cicero philosophical works, likely including his major treatises, example, Tusculan Disputations on the Republic, on the Laws, on the Ends of Good and Evil, wherein Cicero adapts Greek philosophical doctrines, Stoicism, academic skepticism, for Roman audiences, emphasizing virtue, natural law, and civic duty. Aulus Gellius, Attic Nights, a miscellany compiled in the 2nd century CE, containing anecdotes, literary criticism, historical notes, and grammatical discussions, valued for its preservation of otherwise lost fragments of classical authors and insight into Roman intellectual life. Valerius Paterculus, a concise Roman history, the Historiae Romanae, covering mythic times to the death of Livia in 29 CE, offering an Augustan-era perspective on Rome's early kings, republic, and rise under Julius Caesar and Augustus. Diodorus Siculus, his 1st century BCE Bibliothecae Historica, is a universal history in 40 books, with surviving portions spanning mythic times to the post-Peloponnesian War era, valued for its compilation of diverse sources on ancient Mediterranean civilizations. Plautus, a corpus of Roman comedies, example Miles Gloriosus, Menec Me, Prusilis, from the early 2nd century BCE, groundbreaking for integrating Greek New Comedy motifs into Latin verse, influencing later dramatic traditions. Catullus, mid-1st century BCE, lyric poet famous for his personal, emotional verses, example Love Poems to Lesbia. Tibellus and Propertius, late 1st century BCE, elegiac poets whose works explore love, mythology, and rural life. Gallus, 1st century BCE, early elegiac innovator, often idealizing the pastoral and mythic landscape. Claudian, late 4th century CE, court poet at Honorius's court, composing panegyrics, epics, and occasional verse reflecting late antique politics. Ausonius, 4th-5th century CE, poet and teacher of rhetoric under Valentinian I, known for occasional verse, epigrams, and the geographical poem Mosella. Hieronymus Vita, a 16th century Italian humanist, whose Latin works, such as the pastoral epic Christiad and didactic poem Scacia Ludus on chess, exemplify Renaissance Latinity and fusion of classical form with contemporary themes. Virgil, under Christian Virgil, the canonical Roman epicist, 1st century BCE, author of the Eclogues, Georgics, and Aeneid. These poems shaped European literary education throughout the Renaissance and Enlightenment. Jacopo Sannazaro, a late 19th, early 16th century Italian poet, best known for his Latin pastoral Arcadia, 1504, which influenced bucolic and Renaissance vernacular poetry through its blend of classical models and personal sentiment. Together, these volumes illustrate Hegel's deepening engagement with classical philosophy, Aristotle, Cicero, oratory, Demosthenes, Isocrates, historiography, Valerius, Diodorus, and poetic expression across antiquity and the Renaissance, Plautus through Sannazaro, reflecting the comprehensive humanist education of the late 18th century.